Good morning, everybody. Yep, it is Tuesday morning, and we are live. We are live, and we are at it. What do we got? So, just after 6 o'clock, bright and early on a Tuesday, and it really is getting bright and early on a Tuesday. I mean, load shedding and all that bullshit aside, which is just a reality that we have to deal with. It's nice and light. What can I say? 6 o'clock in the morning, there is some sun. So you don't feel like some kind of nocturnal creature first thing in the morning, when we start the show. Because honestly, that's what it feels like in the depths of winter. You feel like one of these old disease. What do they call the creatures that come out at twilight? Crepuscular. That's the word. Crepuscular. Yeah. If you're a creature that's around at like twilight and dusk and dawn, then they call you a crepuscular creature. How's that? Nice word.
I feel like I've been to a couple of clubs where there's a couple of people like that.
Oh my God, yeah. No. There are some people who exist. Their best time is dusk and dawn, like vampires. So, wow, Tuesday morning. We've got lots to get to this morning. We've got JJ Cornish, who'll be talking to us a little bit later on. We've got African Analysis. We also got a brand new episode of Blind History. So we are busy this morning. It's not like we've been sitting here doing bugger all. And we hopefully will have plenty to entertain you between now and 8 o'clock. Let us know what you're up to. You can drop us a comment live during the show on YouTube. You can also send us a voice note if you would like to. I will give you the WhatsApp number so that you can send us voice notes. 071-783-6214. Ryan gets those. And most of them, luckily, he can ignore because they're crap. But there will be a few that we may even play. Who knows, right? So let us know what you're up to. And also let us know what you got up to over the course of the last couple of days. If there's anything really exciting, we can talk about that too. So let's see what people are talking about this morning. Getting dark in the UK now, says Jim. Well, it's because you've just lost a queen. That's why it's dark there.
Pretty much.
Anyway, you watched all of that yesterday. Listen, I must tell you, I love a little bit of history and tradition, and I love a little bit of ceremony. But my God, if I have to see one more funeral march, I think I'll have. And I can only imagine how all the people who participated feel. Listen, I don't. I know it doesn't happen often, so I don't want to sound like someone who has the attention span of a fruit fly. But honestly, one more funeral march is just it'll be one too many.
I was just thinking yesterday, I was like, can you imagine when they got home? They just want to put their feet up.
Oh man.
It's literally like hours.
I mean, some of those people are not spring chickens, they're not young. So I watched some of these old men and older women, and they've been marching for effectively miles. I mean, just in London, it must have been 3-4 miles, and then 3-4 kilometers at least. And then the same thing in Windsor. It was the same people who did both. In uniform. It's got to be really, really tough on some of the older people there. I mean, if you think about it, even like King Charles, used to be Prince Charles, 73 years old. I mean, I think about, my mom who turned 70 the other day. If I had to make her walk for 3 kilometers, I think she'd be pretty exhausted. And she's not an unfit person. She does yoga and all this other stuff. But I wonder about how some of these people must have felt when they got home. They must have been bloody exhausted. It was pretty tiring just to watch it. And
it was.
And really, I don't need to hear any more of the funeral marches. It's just the most repetitive, horrible music. And I'm done with it now. It's enough. So
I'm glad you also agree with that. I was like,
yeah,
it just sounds like death.
It does, and you don't need a lot of it. And now it's been 10 days of this, and they've eventually put the Queen to rest. And thank goodness, the poor woman must be fucking exhausted herself. So
it was a seamless event, though.
No,
it was one of the most extravagant things I've ever seen.
Yeah, and it will be. It's one of the most extravagant things you ever will see, and beautiful. I mean, listen, let's not be let's not be a bunch of spoilt idiots about this. I mean, it is really a once in a lifetime event that someone gets this kind of a send off. And even if you don't, even if you're not into tradition and ceremony and all of that stuff, it's just visually very spectacular. And you've got to think, the British really do things properly.
No, they do.
I went and watched it with some family friends. I mean, we were trying to make a plan with load shedding and everything, but I think we watched a good hour and a half, 2 hours together, which was plenty. Maybe even 3 hours if I think about it. And there's some things about this that are, even again, for someone who's not particularly religious, I thought there's something really lovely about the ceremonial stuff, the religious stuff that they do around this too, which is very familiar, even to somebody who doesn't go to church all the time. There's something nice about it. There's something warm and inviting and friendly and
personal
beautiful
as well.
and personal and dignified. I mean, you could say what you want. I watched a couple of things. You watch our opening of Parliament here. It's just a fucking a free for all with like a bunch of really badly dressed, undignified looking, wobbly people. And I'm talking about all of them from, each of the political parties in this country. And you watch them going to this thing, and I mean, it's like a drinks party at the clubhouse of a local sports club or something compared to this.
Yeah.
And even the Americans, they have their State of the Nation address, State of the Union, which the president always does. And they did a very trimmed down version during COVID. But you watch how the Americans do it. It's kind of cheap. The best thing the Americans do is probably the Oscars. And, that's all glitz and glamour and celebrity. And, that talk about, if the Americans think that the British are obsessed with their royal family, yes, sure. But I think they treat them more normally than Americans treat celebrities.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's spot on.
Yeah. So I think if you're going to look at the way that people behave and the way that they behave at solemn national and international occasions, you've got to give it to the British. They do it better than anyone else. There's no comparison.
I was thinking yesterday, there's no way we could pull that off. There's no way. Because they did like an entire shutdown.
Yeah.
And so there was no way that we could ever pull that off. Also, just because I think there'd be so many different groups that just wouldn't take it, Like yesterday, they just had everybody out. All the roads closed. Every business was shut down. Like,
well, have you seen our military? I mean, like the South African military, if they can't even march in time. I mean, first of all of our soldiers are overweight, all of them, so they wouldn't fit in a uniform.
I was trying to picture them yesterday. Like when I saw all the soldiers marching, I was trying to picture that if we ever had to do that in South Africa, and I was like, it just wouldn't look the same.
Well, we did it for we did a version of this for Nelson Mandela's funeral, which was about the biggest event South Africa's ever hosted internationally, right? I mean, there was this man who, without doubt, had as much gravitas as the Queen, maybe a little more or a little less, depending on who you are. But I mean, certainly Nelson Mandela was at her level, and internationally was as important a man internationally as she was a woman. And when Nelson Mandela died, the world was focused on us, and people flew in from all over the world. It was a huge event, and
we don't have anybody we would do that for now.
No way, not a chance. But I remember our soldiers marching and things. It was just kind of, it wasn't impressive. It really wasn't.
The main thing I remember from that concert, it was years ago. I think I was very young. It was when Will Smith came out for Nelson Mandela. Am I wrong? Was that something different?
Will Smith came out for.
No, okay, sorry. I'm thinking it was when Nelson Mandela, maybe it was his 90th or something.
Yeah, I mean, there were a couple of birthday
Sorry.
parties, but I'm just
Yeah.
talking about the all the ceremony and stuff around it. And
Yeah.
look, there are countries that get it right. If you're impressed by marching soldiers, you'll say, well, North Korea are superb. They really are. They they put on a great show. But there's something about this which is there's a mixture. Because what I thought was probably the most beautiful scene of all of it yesterday was, I mean, I love the Windsor part of it because that's that's the royal family's little country home. Windsor Castle, little. It's that's their real home. That's where that family comes from. That's where they belong. That's where they decided to take their surname from. They have been in possession of that place for 1,000 years. 1,000 years. Just think about that for a second. It's unbelievable. We can't think of 100 years without it stretching us.
Yeah.
We can't even think of 10 years. I mean, how many people do you know who've been able to keep a relationship going for 10 years? How many people do you know who've held down a job for 10 years? 10 years. We're talking about 1,000 years of history here. And my favorite thing there was to watch. You had all the soldiers and all the ceremonial and all the funeral marching that just seemed interminable. And then you had ordinary people lined up on the sides of the road, and especially on that long walk in Windsor. And they were all standing there, civilians, ordinary people who decided to take time out of their day to be a part of this. And then they zoomed out, and they showed all those flowers that they'd put on the sides of the road. Oh man, it was just like square kilometers full of flowers. And I thought, wow, these people didn't just pitch up. They didn't just go and spend money on flowers. They everything they do is beautifully done. It looked neat and tidy and orderly and dignified and lovely and precise. Like everything had a place, and there was a place for everything. And I know that speaks to my OCD, but I've got to say, like, just driving home from watching this on one of our highways in South Africa, and you see all the litter and the mess and the way people, just like, we don't care. We don't give a damn in this country about anything. There, they'll tidy up and line up the flowers that are dying and drying out. Here, we can't even keep our highways clean. I mean, if we had to send a president or a king, and we've got kings in this country, we've got a Zulu king who was enthroned just recently. If we had to send them on a tour of the country and we had to send a camera crew with them, there are only about 10 places they could go where we know for sure there wouldn't be litter and plastic bags lying around, which is so goddamn sad. And I think we could do better. I really do think we could do better. We are just we're such amateurs at all of this. And, I saw Cyril was supposedly there. I don't know if anybody saw him. Our president was supposedly there, while everybody in this country who wanted to watch this had to find a generator. Isn't it crazy? Because he's like so busy playing president that he doesn't give a damn about the fact that, and forget about watching the Queen's funeral, because most people in this country probably couldn't care less about that, but they couldn't even do their work because they were stuck with no power for, I think it was, what was yesterday, 6 or 7 hours of the day. Some people had 8 hours of load shedding yesterday. So enough already, enough. I mean, Tracy reminds me, for Mandela's funeral, we couldn't even get the sign interpreter right. Remember the sign language guy who was making it up? You remember? They eventually found out the guy was completely like making it up.
He didn't know it at all.
Yeah. So even Carl, who's very cynical, he says, I really couldn't give a damn about the royal family, but that spectacle yesterday was really impressive. It is. I mean, it's just an incredible thing to think about. Like, this was all to say goodbye to one person, but it isn't really, because it's a national moment. It's like a moment for the British to be British, and they're very good at that stuff. So, all credit to them. And
It was also nice just to see like that old tradition come through, because you don't see that kind of stuff anymore. Like I've only seen that kind of stuff in like games. So it's to see all of that religious sort of church ceremonies, the marching, all the different militaries come out. It was really a sight to see.
Lovely Lady Lee, I love these conspiracy theories. Lovely Lady Lee says, but she got buried days ago at a secret location. Why will they let the public know exactly where she's buried? I think you're mixing up, King Goodwill Zwelithini and the Queen. We know exactly where every single king and queen of England, going back all 1,000 years that I've just mentioned, is buried. And we know that because they've actually, in some cases, dug them up like a couple of 100 years later. And we know where this queen is going to go because that's where she said she wanted to go from the like her 50s already. She was saying that's where she wants to go. And that's where they eventually buried her last night. They don't keep it secret because people behave. They don't go around tomb robbing, People behave. They, like Tracy says, it was beautiful, dignified, and regal. Listen, do you know who the best member of this royal family is? Is Kate.
Oh yeah.
Oh my God. The new Princess of Wales. This Kate Middleton, who married Prince William. What a spectacular specimen she is. And I don't like to talk about people as being specimens, but she is extraordinary. You see how she even in the car when they were driving behind the whole thing, she's sitting absolutely straight. It's like she's got a rod in her back, and she's just, every movement she makes is elegant and dignified. Her kids were so well behaved. Those two, George and Charlotte. And I just thought, no, I think they left him at home because he's badly behaved. He's still too little, and he was at the Jubilee. He was like, he was a bit of a brat, but as any kid would be. But I looked at this woman and I thought, God, she's got some real dignity about her. She's extremely polished, and I like her a lot. And she's, apart from that, she's beautiful too. She's just every inch of princess. Like, here's a woman who was not born into royalty and inhabits it just so well. So well. I just loved it. And, there are all kinds of things that some people will gravitate towards. I mean, I saw, all these extremely powerful people from all over the world, whether they were politicians, whether people in the military, whether they're people in important offices. I mean, I saw, all the European royals arrived there, and they're not powerful people at all. I mean, the European royals are probably the least important people in Europe now, because if the King of Spain walked past you in Spain, you probably wouldn't notice. I mean, he's not going to be surrounded by tons of people. The King of Holland he looks like the kind of guy you'd meet at the pub on a Friday afternoon. He really does. I mean, these are old families. These are people who they've got long and interesting histories in the countries that they come from, but they're not important people. I mean, the Emperor of Japan was there. The Emperor of Japan, who 2 generations ago was considered a god on earth by the people of Japan. And now, he's a little man in a suit. Comes to a funeral. It is an amazing world we live in, where there are these people, and they're all just people in the end. But all of that rich ceremony and tradition. I mean, even the littlest things that people are blown away by. That crown and that scepter and that orb that sit on top of the
sparkling yesterday.
Wow. I mean, those crown jewels are really something to see. They are beautiful. And again, only the English could do the job of, first of all, making them, and second of all, looking after them as well as they do. And there's so much tradition and history wrapped up in every single part of that whole thing. It's nice to see. And if you care about that stuff, if you care about continuity, and you care about like tradition, and you care about some kind of consistency, then it's nice to see this stuff. What can I say?
There were also a lot of parents that were there talking about some of their kids being in the army, and being part of the events, and how excited they were that their kids got to be part of this specific event, and like what history it was, which was also awesome to see. They were like so proud of their kids.
Yeah.
That coffin looked heavy.
Jesus. And isn't it something to see like those? By the way, it was amazing watching those naval guys pulling the gun carriage, because did you see how they arranged them in order of height? Like they were all about the same height. Like there were a couple of guys on the sides who were taller, but they had the same height of, what was it, 50, 100 of these naval cadets, and they were all measured to be the same height so that they'd look uniform. It's just, the attention to detail.
Yeah.
We can't even line our soldiers up 10 deep and not have one of their stomachs touch the one in front of them because they're so fat. It's just ridiculous. And these guys are arranging them in order of height. Man. Anyway, I mean, unbelievable. That Kate knows exactly how to behave, says Carl. Even the way she subtly chastises the kids, she's easy on the eyes too. Oh yeah, absolutely. God, she's great.
Even there was a point, I don't know if you saw it. I noticed it afterwards. It was pointed out on social media. There was a point where William's daughter was educating the son as when the car comes, you must bow. Like they caught her on camera just telling him, and as the car came, they did the curtsy thing. I was like, that's kind of cool. It's a nice
the one thing I've never really understood, and I've got Scottish ancestors, but I don't get the bagpipes at all. It's a horrible sound. I mean, it's very haunting, and I suppose it has a place in the world. It's not my favorite sound. The Queen used to wake up every morning to a bagpipe, a piper playing outside her window, especially when she was at Balmoral. But she had like a human alarm clock with with the set of bagpipes that walked around and woke her up. And I don't think that's a nice sound to wake up to. I mean, I don't particularly love the sound of bagpipes. That and then it goes, it's not a nice noise. But they love their bagpipes too. I mean, that the one right at the end is very haunting and beautiful. I suppose there's no other noise I can think of, beautiful or not, that compares to that. It's a very unique sound. And then a lot of people were talking about the corgis.
Oh, yes.
They showed 2 of the corgis that were outside when she arrived back at the castle. Yeah, very cute. And her pony that she used to go riding.
Yeah, her horse was there, yeah.
Yeah, it's
Princess Anne was really cool. Like, she was front and center of everything yesterday. I don't know if you saw.
Yeah.
It was kind of nice to see, because I mean, all the eyes are on Charles. It was like yesterday was the one day where it wasn't on Charles and went back to the Queen, but Princess Anne just looked like she was on a mission. I mean, she was there in a uniform and really proud. You could see she was so proud.
I love this. Congo Chris says, I hope they don't give us back the Cullinan diamond. I don't think they will. I give it 2 weeks before it gets stolen, goes missing, or ends up in Cyril's couch. Or someone throws it into the machines at Eskom to like sabotage the machines and breaks them and the diamond. Really, we can't. Honestly, like, South Africa is like a mongoloid child in the world. We cannot be trusted with anything important or responsible. Well, let's put it this way: our politicians certainly can't be.
Yeah.
The average South African, I think we're hardworking, good people, but we could never pull off something like what you saw yesterday.
No.
We don't have the discipline. We don't have the discipline. Most South Africans don't even have the discipline to not throw shit behind them as they walk. Like, we couldn't do that stuff.
I just think, in terms of respect for our political leaders as well, they've turned it into a joke.
Anyway, I mean, listen, I'm not going to sit here and complain about them all morning. Carl says, are you fucking kidding? The bagpipes are the best. I could listen to that all day. Well, you're welcome to it. I mean, everybody, there's something for everybody, right? I saw like Joe Biden and Justin Trudeau and Jacinda Ardern and all of these, in inverted commas, world leaders, these burnt out failures that supposedly shepherded us through COVID. And I thought to myself, God, the Queen really was the last leader who had a presence about her. None of those people, from Cyril to Jacinda to Justin to Joe to Boris, to Liz Truss or whatever her name is, or Nicola Sturgeon from Scotland. None of those people gave me any sense. Like if I met any of those other people at a drinks party, I wouldn't be excited to meet them. I'd be excited to, and I met the Queen years ago, and that was a cool thing. Like meeting her was cool. We didn't share more than a few words, but this was someone worth meeting. None of those world leaders would impress me. And I know it sounds blasé and jaded, but I don't think anyone listening to us this morning, and tell me if you disagree, because I want to know, that is there anybody of those politicians that you'd be like excited to meet? Because there's none of them that I'd be excited to meet. Not a single one. Not from here.
I'd like to meet William.
North America.
He'd be really cool.
Yeah, but he's not a politician, you see.
No,
so
no.
I think I'd agree with you on that. But is there any one of those people that you would be like, oh, I'd be so excited to meet that person? Someone I really want to meet.
Yeah.
Not really, huh?
No.
All right.
Joe Biden's statement this morning.
What did he say?
The COVID pandemic is officially over.
Oh, has Joe decided it's over? So now we've got to take him seriously. I don't think he knows where he is. I mean, like you look at the expression on his face. He's like, he doesn't know what's going on. He even said to Jill, his wife, at something he was at 2 or 3 days ago when I was watching TV, he comes on and he's sitting there and he's, yeah, like when someone's confused and dazed and old and they don't know what the fuck's going on around them. He's sitting there doing that, and then he gets up and he actually says this to you, which way are we going? To Jill. And she's like, this way. I mean, she's nothing but a caregiver. She's like those people who, you see at old age homes who like take the old person by the hand and like walk them to the pudding table. That's what she's like. It's terrible. Those corgis will live a better life than pretty much anyone in South Africa. Well, I don't know. They're going to live with Prince Andrew. So, I mean, as long as he's not inviting any of Jeffrey Epstein's other friends around, then everything will be fine. I lived with corgis me whole life, says Lighthouse Barber. Well, my sister has a corgi and had a corgi, and now she's got a puppy. So she loves those dogs, and I sent her a little picture of the corgis. She's like, oh, I want them. Apparently, Anne broke tradition by being a woman walking behind the coffin. Just beautiful. Yeah, she did. The only dog.
So he cried during the funeral.
Did he?
A little bit. They like caught him on camera, and everyone was like, "Guys, the king just buried his mom today." Like, But
well, I mean, these are ordinary people. When you zoom out far enough, and you realize, like, sure, they're all part of a big machine, and they've all got a role to play, and they've all got a place to stand, and all got a thing to say. But they are also. I mean, I looked at Princess Beatrice as Andrew's daughter, and she lost her granny. This is her. Yeah. Like, you'd be sad if you lost your granny. I've lost both of mine, and yes, I mean, it's sad. So there's a personal element to this, which if you take away all the trappings and the processions and the music and the uniforms, and there's a family in the middle of it. And I did like the fact that it went from the scale of Westminster Abbey, which was this big state occasion, to Windsor, which was a little bit smaller and more intimate, more like Prince Philip's funeral. And then there was something that they did last night where they actually buried the Queen and Prince Philip together in the George VI Memorial Chapel, which was like so private they didn't let cameras in. I like that, that there was some part of it that was not about the show.
Yeah.
Some part of it was like this family just saying goodbye to somebody who'd been around for 96 years and had done an extraordinary job. I don't think anyone can deny that she did a great job. Corona's boring says Putin has got presence. Oh yeah, sure. Like a serial killer, but he has presence. I don't think Vladimir Putin's the kind of guy you're going to go and like have a fun conversation with.
No,
Let's have a drink, Vlad. Be like, what do you want to drink for? I told you everything I need to tell you. Now you tell me your things and go away. I don't think he'd be a fun person to talk to. But yeah, I mean, he's certainly more interesting than any of those politicians I was talking about just now. There's a photo of Sleepy Joe and Cyril the Squirrel giving each other the most limp-wristed handshake in human history. Yeah, I think they both have like soft, wet handshakes, both Cyril and Joe. I think they're both the kind of people who, after you've shaken their hands, and I have shaken Cyril's hand, I can't remember. It was not memorable at all. But I reckon like afterwards you'd want to wipe your hand on your pants because it would be there, limp and wet. How bad is that? I'd like to go drinking with Boris, says Congo Chris. Yeah, probably.
no.
Yeah, Skulk Poseidon Note was really funny on Friday. Oh, he was great to have on. He was terrific.
Oh, man. So funny.
I'd like to meet Cyril and tell him he's a spineless puss, says Carl. Our listeners don't. People who listen to this show don't care, hey? GC, you're so far up that woman's ass. You're a sycophant. Who? Which woman? The Queen? Okay. You know what, Keenan? Name for me a person who is alive right now who even comes close to her in terms of just not putting a foot wrong for 70 years on the throne. Name one person who even for 10 years could put on as good a show of duty and devotion as her. Just one person who you look up to, Keenan, and let's see what kind of a pantheon of greats you would put in your hall of heroes. I want to see who you'd come up with.
By the way, did you see how many people watched the funeral yesterday?
Well, apparently it was the biggest TV event in history. They say more people watched this than any Olympic Games, than any major television event. So again, even if you don't care about 4.1 billion, that's half the population of the Earth.
How crazy is that?
It's insane, right?
I know. I even read on another one that it was 5.1.
I want to go back here because Keenan started this fight. So now let's take it to its logical conclusion. All right, Keenan, what other thing comes close to that? There isn't anything. There is no recorded event in human history that has had as many people watching it as this. So what did you spend your time doing yesterday, Keenan? Masturbating? What did you do? Tell us. Congo Chris says, does Charles inherit the swans? Oh, this is amazing. So apparently the Queen, and now the King, owns every swan in England. They own every dolphin and porpoise that lives on the coast of England. These are the funniest things. Any child who's an orphan under the age of 5 is supposed to be in the care of the King or the Queen. These are the things that because Britain doesn't have a written constitution. These are things that fall to the monarch. It's amazing. If I were religious, I would say she's having a nice tea party with the worst of them. Hitler, Stalin, Genghis Khan. Really, you put her with them. You think this little old lady who didn't hurt a single person, in fact, she dismantled a whole lot of systems which the world agreed needed dismantling. She oversaw and supported the breakdown of an empire, the opposite of colonialism. But she's a problem, Keenan. She's drinking tea with Hitler. That's how you see her. Great. I'm glad you've read more than... Oh, no, wait. You haven't even read a history book. You've just shown yourself to be a complete ignoramus. But keep coming. Let's see what else you got. What was it, a handshake or a reach around? Says Steve. People are so funny. Oh, man. Marty says, shame, so many people without lives watching the bullshit. What, 4.5 billion people or 4.1 billion people are all people without lives watching bullshit. Okay, but at least this was a world event. Would you prefer they were watching the Kardashians? You know? I played a drinking game where I would drink every time I saw a person of color in uniform. I think I only drank 7 times. Maureen says, you just made my day. I moved to the Caribbean 14 years ago and haven't heard your show since then. I found your show live a few minutes ago by accident and realized why I loved your show. You haven't changed a bit. Thanks, Maureen. Okay, good. Tracy says, Keenan is just stirring. Give him the wooden spoon for the day. Okay, cool. Well, he's gone very quiet because I think he's realized he sounds really stupid. Do not mess with Gareth now. Wait till he's rested and back from vacation. Listen, I'm in a mood to fight with people at the moment. I don't know if you've noticed. I'm in a mood to just stop putting up with shit. I really have realized in the last couple of months, first of all, that I am a grumpy son of a bitch, and that's never going to change. So if you don't like that, then there are plenty of other shows for you, and I'll give you a moment to just find something else to listen to. Because I don't care. I'm not going around kissing babies and shaking hands like the royal family did for the last 10 days, going, oh, thank you so much for coming. If you don't like the show, bye-bye. Not interested. And I've also realized, like, I could never do any of those jobs. I couldn't be a politician, kissing babies and asking for your vote. I couldn't be royal because I wouldn't want to shake all those dirty people's hands. I just realized, like, this is the only job I can do. I can't do any other job. Because
I was looking at that as well. I was like, no way.
Could you do that?
No. There was a lot of people I was looking at yesterday, and I was like, I have so much respect for them because I couldn't do it. Like, even most of that military stuff. Did you see how neutral they'd stay? Like, even the pallbearers. I was like, imagine if one of them had to sneeze.
Yeah,
can you imagine?
Fart.
And you've got 4.1 billion people watching you. Like, the pressure is just immense. 1 foot wrong. I mean, no, I can't do that.
Yeah, it's pretty wild to see. It really is extraordinary. Okay, Congo Chris says people who shit on the royals are hollow. The very seldom events they arrange are amazing spectacles and are free for the world to watch and remind us that the world isn't as bad as we often feel it is. Well, I always think that it's just an example of where when people act in concert, when a whole lot of people do something together, it can be beautiful and spectacular. And it can show us what people are capable of at their very best. So even if you take the person of royalty out of it, even if you remove all of the florid stuff of, like, your majesty and the uniforms and the crowns and the jewels, and if you take all of that away, what you have is thousands of people, just the ones who participated in the ceremony. Forget about the crowds who came and watched. But just the people who participated, you see them doing things rehearsed, in time, beautifully put together, looking, you knew that every soldier had polished every button on their uniform. You knew that. Mm-hmm. You knew that they were taking care of themselves. They knew their place in a procession. Like, how many people in the world know their place and know what their job is to do and can do it really well, can do it so well that we never notice one of the people not doing their job out of the thousands? That's incredible. That takes such, I want to say just discipline, but it isn't. It's also like a sense of duty and pride. It takes pride. That's pretty amazing, because you see all of these people doing this for a purpose, and the purpose isn't like one person's funeral. It's like, this is what our nation is. This is what we stand for. This is what we believe in. This is how we do stuff. We do stuff properly. That's great. Even though Britain's not an empire anymore, and even it's a little island and it doesn't really have any of the clout that it used to have. 100 years ago, the British Empire, like, the sun never set on it. A full quarter of the world, and some people would say even more, was directly ruled by a person who had a crown on their head and sat in Windsor Castle. That's obviously not what happens now. But you could say, influence-wise, if you look at the 4.1 billion people who watched this thing yesterday, you could say that currently the British monarchy is more powerful than it's ever been as a symbol, which is quite something.
No, it is. And also, William just became like an instant billionaire. I don't know if you saw how much he inherits after this
No?
whole. I need to double check it, but basically they say now he's financially independent. So they were obviously left money by their grandmother, but now he gets to take over certain areas and actually get money from it. So he gets like 1.2 billion almost instantly, and now he's financially independent and he's no longer under his father.
Someone said to me, why would you want to be king? Like Charles had a pretty good life as Prince of Wales. You know, he had all of the trappings. He had nice places to live. He could travel anywhere he wanted to, do anything he needed to. He could go on holiday whenever he felt like it. And he got, treated better than anyone else wherever he went. So why would he want to be king? Because as this friend of mine said, it's more work, but the same amount of money. So I thought, yeah, maybe. I don't think it's the kind of job that anyone, you think you'd want to do it. But then if that's your whole life every day, think about how, for example, we all wake up and do our job, whatever our job might be. And some days you love doing it and some days you are excited to get there. But most days, let's be honest with ourselves, most days you're like, oh, I don't want to get out of bed, right? That's how everybody feels. So I'm sure he does too. And, having to put on this uniform or that uniform, having to shake hands with this person or that person, having to organize this or that event. I mean, it sounds easy to us because it's stuff that we do in our spare time, right? And that we think, oh, it must be nice to dress up and to do all this stuff. But I think it must get a bit tired for even them. Every job has its pluses and minuses, right? Anyway, so let's leave that behind. There are a couple of news stories, and we've got to get to JJ Cornish in a short while. But let me just talk to you about some of the stuff in the news. So we'll begin with Spotify, who have warned Apple Watch owners not to update their iOS. Now, do you care about this? Do you not? Let me tell you why. So Spotify apparently has said that there will be problems with their app on the Apple Watch. Apple released Watch OS 9, the latest software, on Monday. The new software offers several updates, including 4 new watch faces, expanded metrics on the workout app, redesigned Compass app, and enhanced sleep features. But it might also contain a bug that hinders the audio on Spotify, the streaming company said. Since the release, Spotify has been sending emails to users warning them to not update their phones to Apple Watch's newest operating system. So, Ryan, I mean, can't these two companies figure this out?
Apple has a bad habit of just releasing updates and not giving everyone the inside info, and they have to take a couple of weeks to get used to it. But I don't know. I don't listen. I had Apple Watch for a little bit, but I'm old school. I prefer the analog watches, so I sold mine. But I don't know who listens to music through the Apple Watch. Because normally you just listen to it through your phone, unless you're like one of those joggers who take your watch with you, I suppose.
Right. Well, I mean, I don't know why they can't sort this stuff out. Why does it even have to end up on our tables? Why does it have to end up in our world? They should figure it out between them. Spotify and Apple are huge companies. I'm sure they can get a little committee together on either side and figure out how to stop this stuff from becoming our problem, right? We're paying for this technology. Sort it out.
I think it's just because they want people to move to Apple Music, so they probably just don't tell.
Oh, so it's sabotage.
It's a little bit. And so like when they release the new update, it takes all the third-party apps a bit to sort of adjust the new software. I'm assuming. I could be wrong.
Well, I don't know. Okay, so then with President Cyril Ramaphosa set to return home following the funeral of the Queen, the ANC's Gwen Ramokgopa insists that he's not just playing politics. She said the governing party is feeling the pressure from South Africans who are demanding answers about the constant power outages. On Sunday, Eskom CEO Andre de Ruyter said that following more breakdowns at more power stations, it was impossible to avoid stage 6 power cuts. Ramaphosa has been out of the country for a week. He was due to attend the UN's General Assembly after the funeral, but has decided to return home. Good. Get your ass home here, Cyril. We need you to sort this thing out. So apparently the story at Eskom is that it's sabotage. Basically, criminal gangs who are holding Eskom hostage and are essentially extorting money from the government to either enrich themselves or they will mess with our power stations. Now, why is it difficult for us to just get a bunch of law enforcement people, whether it's the cops or the Hawks or the NPA, to just go and arrest and put people straight into jail? Like, these people are putting the nation at risk. They should just go straight to jail. This is treason. These people should actually be executed for what they're doing. If we made an example of people who are sabotaging power stations now, we would be, I promise you, it would stop overnight. If we actually put people to death, it would be over tomorrow. Like, just publicly execute 2 of these people who've been sabotaging power stations. Tomorrow, it'll stop. Am I wrong?
Yeah.
And can we afford to put 2 people who are doing damage to the whole country to death? Of course we can afford it. Do it tomorrow, it'll stop. I don't know why we bugger around with these things.
And they say we're like this close to stage 8.
Well, exactly. So if we don't take this in hand, but Cyril will come back and he'll have more talks, and they'll sit around and they'll smile at each other and nothing will happen. So, I mean, if you want to sort this out, this requires some serious action. Get on it.
I just feel sorry for business owners. I don't know how they can operate like this. I mean, it's one thing for us to be out of power, but imagine businesses that rely on power to make money.
Even little businesses, Ryan, even little spaza shops that can't keep their fridges and freezers going, you know.
Exactly.
And then you mentioned this, so it's worth throwing this in here. COVID-19 pandemic is over, according to Joe Biden. He declared the pandemic over, even as the number of Americans who've died from COVID continues to rise. But, you know, that only really mattered while Donald Trump was president. It doesn't matter when Joe Biden's. More people have died from COVID since Joe Biden became president than died while Trump was. But it doesn't matter because the Democrats run the media. So that's not a useful story. Biden said that while we still have a problem, the situation is rapidly improving. Statistics show that over 400 Americans on average are dying from the virus every day. Still 400 people a day dying. It's pretty.
Do you remember?
I thought we were over long ago, but 400 a day seems like a lot, right?
No, it does seem like a lot. Do you remember when we used to watch the news every night and there'd be that counter on the side?
Yes.
Like how that magically just disappeared.
Right. Well, because of course, if we actually asked ourselves, like, how many people die a day of flu, how many people die of tuberculosis, especially in a country like South Africa, how many people are dying of heart disease, you know, heart attacks, that kind of thing, strokes. If we had that ticker on all day, we'd be depressed all the time because we'd be thinking, oh my God, there's so many people dying all the time. But that's just what happens every day. People die and people are born. Derek says, at what point do South Africans change who they vote into power? How far down the shitter must this country go? Well, I'm afraid this is true for any country in the world. It has to always get much worse before it gets better. That's just how it goes. Anyway, so Joe Biden's done this. He made this speech about how COVID's over. Well, it's because it suits him now to say it's over.
Yeah, exactly.
He'd said it before; it wouldn't have suited. Plus, I think people also COVIDed out. I think they've had enough, right? Just before we get to JJ, apparently a South African mine manager was fined 50,000 rand after 8 people died in Burkina Faso. So if you want to run a mine in Burkina Faso and 8 people die, it's just a 50 grand fine. That's all. That's all they got. That's Burkina Faso reckons a 50,000 rand fine for the death of 8 people. That's less than 10,000 rand a person. That's acceptable. What do you think of that?
It's terrible.
That's really shows you, like, some countries do not value human life at all, and Burkina Faso is one of those places. Anyway, he's been found guilty of involuntary manslaughter in the deaths, ordered to pay a fine around 50,000 rand. He will serve no time in jail after a court handed him a 2-year suspended sentence. His Australian colleague will, with contact company Burncut, that's what it's called, was given a 1 year suspended sentence and a fine worth 25,000 rand. The sentences have shocked some in Burkina Faso for their leniency, though the families of the miners took a more pragmatic stance, stressing the victory in anyone being held responsible for the incident, praising the huge effort that went into the recovering of the bodies. Still, I mean, these are people who've died, so it's a pretty awful situation, no matter how you look at it.
Exactly.
Do you remember? I mean, we were talking about COVID just a minute ago and how it's over now. Do you remember that ridiculous stuff that people were doing, where they were wearing gloves and face shields and all of that stuff? And I mean, there still probably are like pockets of the world, like you find these preppers who still living underground from, didn't they make a movie of like this family who went underground during the 1950s because they were worried about nuclear war with Russia, and then they come back up out of ground in like the 90s or the 2000s, and the world has completely changed. But they were living like underground, so now they're up in the real world again. And it makes me think that they're going to be people we will discover, like small corners of humanity 10 years from now, who are still in full COVID panic. There'll be some people who will still be walking around in like masks and face shields and with sanitizer all over the place and gloves on and socially distancing. There'll still be people like that in 10 years from now, and we'll think of them as a curiosity, don't you think?
Yeah, no, that's for sure. There was a meme that was going around on Facebook of all the when the pandemic was first announced, all the ridiculous things people were wearing. Like there was one guy, I remember he put his head in like a water bottle. He had cut out a water bottle, put over his head, and then he opened the lid at the top for air. So I thought it was quite funny.
Oh, wow.
There were so many ridiculous things that people like did before. Do you remember when masks were sold out? Like you just couldn't get them, and so then people had to just find things.
And there were also those people who insisted on their kids being like masked up, and we knew this was a stupid thing, but up to a short while ago, kids were still being told to wear masks. I mean, think about the craziness of the last 3 years. Just think about the world we lived in 2019, and nobody could have predicted what would have happened at the beginning of 2020. Nobody would have. It's crazy. If you look back now, even though we're just coming out of it, you look back now and it's like, God, we were so stupid, right?
No, it's true. We were talking about it when we went out the other day, because we went to the Sunday Times Gen Next Awards.
Oh yeah,
and
you guys were representing.
Yeah, we were representing, and some people and I were talking about it, and we're like, it's nice to see how quick we bounce back, because to have imagine just going and seeing like just people with masks on, it wouldn't be the same. It is so nice just to interact with people, bring them over for a conversation, see them smile when something cool is happening.
Yeah,
it's a whole different world.
It's sort of back to normal for a lot of people, obviously, now that the country's getting warmer again and we go outside more, and I'm excited about just being outdoors more, getting to do fun stuff outside rather than being inside the whole time. Avril says, Gareth, COVID made people aware of spreading disease, washing hands. It's an awareness. Yeah, but all of that obsession with washing hands, and trust me, I've been a hand washer long before COVID. I'm not that keen on, touching other people, especially ones I don't know. But I'm not paranoid about it. And the danger of being too germ phobic is that you don't actually get diseases. So when you do get sick, you get really sick. We all know about this, and this is what people are going through at the moment. It's the tiniest little things that could completely knock people off their socks when it comes to being healthy or unhealthy. Lovely lady Lee says, can you imagine how stupid people that were in arguments about this COVID feel? Yeah. Oh, yeah. There are lots of them. There's still those people who are like, oh, no, the government are right to lock us down. Do you remember those people? You remember the Pray for Cyril Brigade?
Yeah, I remember.
I will not forgive and forget the stupidity of that shit. Like there are a bunch of people who still have to account for themselves. There is a Scientology enclave here in Midrand. You should have seen them at the mall on weekends in hazmat attire.
No.
Oh, wow. Is there a Scientology enclave in Midrand? That's hilarious. That's crazy. Oh, man. All right. You've been getting into a new series on Disney Plus. So tell us about that.
So it's a series called Get Back. It's about the Beatles. So it was a documentary that was filmed.
Heard about this.
I think it was in like 60. God, I don't even know. It's between 62 and 66. It was like planning their return. When they went to record an album, they had 3 weeks in the studio, and they were planning. You know that very famous concert, because I think was it 66 that they stopped touring, or at 62 they stopped? I can't remember. But
Ryan, I wish I could help you on this. I don't know.
I'm trying to think, because I was watching it. I've been watching it over the last couple of days. So it's a 3-part series by Peter Jackson's on it, and it's 2.5 hours an episode. So I'm only like an episode.
Are there any hobbits in this, or is it
Hobbits?
really strictly? Yeah, well, Peter Jackson, he's the guy who did Lord of the Rings. So expected like the Beatles, but a Hobbit version of the Beatles. All right, John, are you going to play the drums, Ringo? Oh my goodness, you got hairy feet.
Can I tell you what? It's the weirdest thing though, because you don't think like back then, you didn't think cameras had that kind of technology, but they've kept this in the vault for so long. And now when you look at it, it was actually. Sorry?
No, I've got to watch this, dude. It's
oh no, you have
sounds really good. Somebody told me about this months ago, because it's been on for a while, right? I mean, it's been available for a while. But the Beatles, arguably, well, I mean, some people would say it's not arguable, but you've got to say they are easily one of the greatest bands of the 20th century, right? John and Paul as a writing combo, are probably one of the greatest songwriting duos of all time, if not the greatest pop music songwriting duo of all time. And these guys just changed the way that music was understood, performed, received, promoted, marketed, merchandised. Everything about music was just different after the Beatles.
I love the Beatles. I can literally just put on any Beatles record and just listen to it all day. And so, like, I was watching in the first episode, you actually get to witness like how brilliant. Firstly, Paul McCartney is just brilliant as a musician, as a human being.
So this is what someone said to me, and you've watched the show, so you can maybe help me. I always thought that that John Lennon was the serious composer guy, and John Lennon was the one who kind of, all right, guys, let's get working. But actually, a friend of mine who's watched this already and who told me to watch it says Paul is the one who you really need to. He was the brains of the business, actually.
Yeah. Because and it actually comes out in this documentary, because you see how sort of it's like a normal band, like how when a band gets back together and they don't have deadlines or like a record label pushing them for something, a lot of bands don't have the discipline to sort of get an album together. And so this was the case with the Beatles, and Paul was saying that, and he's like, guys, we really need to be more disciplined and come up with the stuff. And you can tell there was a lot of friction in the actual band itself. And I was just watching, and I was like, Paul had to put up with a lot, but he was also brilliant. And like you could tell George would get jealous because Paul and John
they cover the whole thing with Yoko? Is she in there?
Oh, Yoko doesn't leave John's side like the whole. Well, since I've started watching it for an episode and a half in, like she literally sits with him while he plays the piano, and she even jumps on the mic at some point, and you can tell like he loves her. But you can tell she was the driving force behind dismantling that group.
You reckon? That's what people always said at the time.
I think Paul admitted it a couple of years ago.
We've got to save some of the powder for the next hour. We've got JJ Cornish joining us at 7:00 now. I was going to put him on now because he came on, but we won't have enough time, so I'll talk to him as soon as our break is over. JJ Cornish with Africanalysis coming right up. So stick around for that and a whole lot more. CliffCentral.com, Tuesday morning. And by the way, if you're wondering where Lebang is this morning, Lebang has had load shedding 2 weeks in a row on a Tuesday, so we haven't been able to get her online. And you know what? I don't want to struggle with technical issues. So thank you, Ryan, for stepping in this morning. We've got JJ Cornish next.
This week on the Auto Trader podcast,
I bought 822 kilowatt hours. And if I do the maths on that, that cost 2,000 Rand. So 2,000 divided by 822.1, I paid 2.43 Rand per kilowatt hour.
catch us every Monday at 9 a.m. on YouTube and on autotrader.co.za.
Just because it's about technology, connecting your business to the rest of the world doesn't mean you need to send rockets to space and use complicated solutions. Want to simplicate things? Well, join Jaco Voigt, who is the CEO of Catalytic, on the Unbundled podcast. With skin in the game and a keen focus on educating and assisting you and your business, Jaco decodes all the aspects of connectivity, security, and cloud solutions. Unbundled is brought to you by Catalytic and is available on cliffcentral.com, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Of wherever you get your podcasts, hopefully your podcast is with us this morning. And we have an exciting episode of Africanalysis, which is brought to you by the Johannesburg Business School with JJ Cornish next. Hey, JJ, how are you?
I'm enormously well, thank you. Very kind of you to ask.
Well, I was going to come to you just a couple of minutes ago, but we would have run out of time before 7 o'clock. So we've got the bonus, the added benefit of having you for a little bit longer now after 7. Lots to talk about. I just mentioned that story about that Burkina Faso mine, which I'm sure you're aware of, so we don't need to go over it again. But pretty amazing. You get a 50,000 Rand fine for 8 people dying in your mine in Burkina Faso. Huh? What do you think of that?
What happens in Burkina Faso? You know, that's the land. That's what it means. The land of the honest people. But
Really?
Not everything that's happening. Yeah, was Upper Volta. But now the land of the honest people. And it's not really, sadly. What happens in Ouagadougou is not always honest, I have to say.
You got to say, though, that they've got the best name of a capital city, Ouagadougou.
Yeah. I remember writing an editorial on it once and saying something they'd done wrong, and the headline was Ouagadougou Bougou, which I thought was enormously funny.
I still think that's good. I'm glad you brought it up. All right, so let's talk about some of the stories that are going on. This is brought to you by the Johannesburg Business School. We're looking at what happens on the African continent. Let's start off with Morocco. I mean, we spoke briefly about Morocco the last time we had you on, and you were telling us what a what a pariah they are. You know, how Morocco's this embarrassment. But let's just talk about what's going on in Brussels, because apparently a whole bunch of Berbers took to the streets there to commemorate the Rif Rebellion, which happened 100 years ago in Morocco. So what's the latest on this, and how can a 100-year-old rebellion be making the people in Rabat nervous?
Well, very simply, Morocco's an illegal occupation of the Western Sahara and have been so since 1975. They have managed to persuade Western powers, and at the time, you know, when we were still talking about the domino theories, and back then in the 60s, anything that was left of center was dangerous. But they persuaded them that if they were forced to leave the Western Sahara, the whole of Morocco would come apart. And then what would exist in its place, they didn't know. And they mentioned at the time the Rif. Now, the Rif is that area it has 233 kilometers of seaboard across the north of Morocco. In other words, that's 233 kilometers of Mediterranean coastline. Ceuta and Melilla, those two...
That just past the Atlas Mountains.
Indeed, yes. So it's got part of the Atlas Mountains, part of the desert. The Rif means the edge of the civilized or cultivated area. And basically they fought not the Moroccans at the time, but the Spaniards, 1921. And when Spain eventually brought France in to help them, Ceuta and Melilla, those two enclaves that we've spoken about, Spanish enclaves on the African mainland that we've spoken about, are in the Rif area. And so essentially France came in and they retook the Rif guerrillas in that period between 1921 and 26, that war period. They made significant inroads into the Spanish colonial area, but with French help, they mounted what was, Gareth, historically the first amphibious landing of using planes and tanks and that sort of thing in history. And they retook the Rif area. So it's quite amazing. And to this day, Morocco says, well, you know, if you get tough with us on Western Sahara, this is what's going to happen. The Rif area will want to go next. And they just couldn't stand that. The separatists, and they're still there. They still are now that Morocco's taken over the area, or certainly Morocco's taken over Western Sahara, the kingdom itself remains threatened. It's very, very tenuous. And of course, they have a lot of jihadi terror and that sort of thing to contend with. But as long as the Western countries believe that Morocco is that vulnerable, they're not going to hold its foot to the fire on Western Sahara. So it was a 100-year commemoration in Brussels. People took to the streets, and it simply underlined the tenuous position that Morocco is in. I certainly believe that if they let go of the Western Sahara. Yes.
Sorry, well, it sounds like a stupid question, and it may be, but why in Brussels? What has Belgium got to do with a rebellion 100 years ago in Morocco, and why was the commemoration in Brussels? I'm confused.
Much of the Berber community, and that's who lived in the Rif area, much of the Berber community has been displaced. And they certainly couldn't hold a demonstration like that in Morocco. Well, not if they didn't, you know, without taking their lives in their hands. So a lot of the Berber community has been displaced and finds themselves in Brussels. And, you can have that kind. I mean, the sort of demonstrations they used to have in London when I was there, all sorts of people. On Trafalgar Square, you could demonstrate, you could genuinely exercise free speech.
And maybe also because it's the capital of the EU, this is maybe where they get the attention of all the other EU nations. They clearly need.
Indeed.
Yeah. All right. Let's turn our attention to another B, from Brussels to Burundi. They have a new prime minister. Now, Burundi gets way less attention than Rwanda, even though they're around about the same size. They're in the same sort of area. Burundi was very much involved in all the trouble that they had in the 90s in that part of Africa. But Burundi seems to be kind of given a little less attention than anywhere else. Why do you think that is? And what is the story with their new prime minister? I mean, is this someone who we should be excited about?
Burundi gets less attention because they didn't have the genocide at the time, that we got our democracy very recently. But Burundi has had its own genocide. There's a famous book called Tomorrow Morning. My children will, please take my children because tomorrow morning my wife and I will be dead. The same makeup in terms of Hutu and Tutsi minority, but in a much stronger position. This was an area that none other than Jacob Zuma mediated a settlement, and he did a bang-up job, it has to be said. Although the man they put in power there, Pierre Nkurunziza, was a born-again Christian football fanatic and a bit of a beast as well. Of course, he died of COVID, but they never admitted that's what he died of. Now, what has happened is his successor, Evariste Ndayishimiye, has replaced Alain Bioni, the prime minister, who had a very, very parlous human rights record. So people said, oh, good, at last he's gone. Well, the fact is his replacement, Gervais Ndirakobuchi, is even worse. And he was a guy who was the security advisor to Pierre Nkurunziza, responsible for personally commanding a lot of this. In fact, Ndirakobuchi has the nom de guerre, the alias of Ndaku Karika, which means I will kill you. So, you've got, Johnny, I will kill you as your prime minister. You don't have things going your way, I don't think, if you're a human rights activist. So, it's very, very, very sad. Now, the United States and the European Union both put sanctions on Ndirakobuchi for his human rights violations. But it seems to me that this shows that Ndayishimiye, rather than wanting to reform, is wanting to crack down and to be and putting an enforcer in quotes, an enforcer in as his prime minister means that we can expect more tough stuff. When you speak about Burundi to our own foreign affairs officials and those from elsewhere, they all say that in terms of, we all give the Rwandans a tough time for their human rights record. They say that Burundi is getting away with a lot of wicked stuff.
Yeah, that's amazing. First of all, I'm just blown away by your erudition and being able to get these names right. They are very let's just say interesting sounding names. Pierre Nkurunziza, I remember him, but I don't remember very much of what's happened since he died of COVID. Is Burundi heading in a direction that we could kind of equate with Rwanda's current direction? Paul Kagame seems to have that place under his thumb, and it seems to be working in some people's opinions. In other people's opinions, there's no media freedom. There's no ability for people to actually say anything critical of the government. And we know that opposition party politics in that part of the world are pretty much suppressed and oppressed and denied. Is Burundi similar in that respect? Do you think it's going to head in the same direction?
Sad to say, it had African Union peacekeepers, including South African peacekeepers there. And, I remember being there at the Source du Nil, the Source of the Nile hotel, very famous hotel, with a delegation of European, they were members of the Security Council. And there was one of them, I think an Argentinian, explaining to me how he played rugby against the South Africans. This was the ambassador. What an interesting guy. And there was this, but he's so sorry because he looked out over the golf course and said, I didn't bring my clubs with me. And there was this rumbling in the distance. And I said, ambassador, it's probably as well. Do you know what that rumbling is? He said, no. I said, well, that's mortar fire. Would you want to be playing golf with your hard hat on? Or he only looked at me with a little nonplussed. We were there with Security Council members looking at it. The fact is, that Pierre Nkurunziza, what he did, the worst thing he did was take an unconstitutional third term in power. And that brought plans of a coup. And, he had a very, very oppressive system to keep him there.
All right, so Burundi, Brussels. Now let's take our attention to this could be interesting. Uganda. Apparently there was a music festival. They called it an immoral music festival in Uganda. 10,000 foreigners. What made it immoral, and what is all the stink about, JJ?
Well, Uganda is, again, not a very free country. And if you were alive in a child of the 60s, as I was, you'd understand that when you have an oppressive government, this is one of the areas that the most afraid of. I remember going to music festivals under Ian Smith's government, where the secret police tried to blend in with us, and they wear kaftans and so on, but they all had the military haircuts, so they stuck out like a pair of dog's testicles. It was not possible to hide them. But here we had the Speaker of Parliament warning that this Nyege festival, which eventually drew nearly 30,000 people, was a breeding ground for sexual immorality and homosexuality. They take a very, very dim view of homosexuality. They wanted the death penalty for it at one point, until Britain said, well, try that and then you'll see no more British aid. And Yoweri Museveni said, stop trying to bully us, but we won't actually hang homosexuals after all. So, that's it. But the fact is, it's I suppose like taking children into a candy store. Same factor. Once we had these warnings, terrible, dire warnings of what an immoral sort of thing would be, the ticket sales absolutely soared. And there was even film of the deputy speaker or the deputy prime minister, Rebecca Kadaga, actually dancing at the festival. But they warned, you can go ahead, but this was prevented. Sexual orgies, nudity, vulgar language, songs and gestures. But they had a number of people there really enjoyed the hell out of themselves. And I think the authorities are sorry that they tried to put the kibosh on it.
Yeah, it's amazing how when you try to shut these things down, that's when they get really exciting. And I'm very excited to hear that they managed to stop some of the immoral songs, but also immoral gestures. JJ, yeah. I'm trying to think about.
You're shaking your finger. You are one finger away of making an immoral gesture at me. One finger away.
Well, thank you very much for your time this morning. It's always good to get a catch up with JJ and to find out what's happening in places as varied as Uganda, Morocco, and Burundi. And I'm sure that next time we see you, we'll have even more to talk about. But thanks so much, JJ. Good to have you here.
Always a pleasure.
Awesome. There we go. JJ Cornish, everybody. And that was brought to you by the Johannesburg Business School Africanalysis. We'll have some more of that in about 2 weeks' time. Awesome. All right, that's Ryan. We only got a little bit of time left, and we've got to get to blind history. What else is on your agenda for this morning?
Nothing much. I'm going to be heading to the office.
Yeah.
I got some work to do. Busy working on Simpiwe's podcast for this week.
Very good.
That's really cool for the third draft. So that comes out, I think what's today? Tuesday, so tomorrow. So it should be out tomorrow.
Someone says here they'd be surprised if our government could identify Burundi on a map. Do you know where Burundi is on a map?
No, I'm not. I'm not gonna lie. I don't think so.
I wonder how many people would. It's hard to find. It's not a huge, big country, but the map of Africa has pretty much been the same since I was at school. There are one or two things that are different. There's a new country, Western Sahara, which Morocco doesn't recognize. There's obviously South Sudan, which is the youngest country in the world. But otherwise, the map of Africa is pretty much the same. So I think you'd be able to find Rwanda, Burundi. What else is near there? Congo is off to the west of that. Kenya and Tanzania and Uganda off to the right of that, to the east. But you've got Lake Victoria in that area. So it's an interesting part of our continent. But this is what I love about when JJ comes on, is he gives you a little tour of the map. Ouagadougou. Do you know how you spell that, by the way?
No.
Ougadougou. Ouagadougou. O-U-G. Oh, God. I just know it starts with an O-U-G. I mean, don't ask me. I actually have to write it down to be able to say it properly. Ouagadougou. That's
awesome. I would have never thought it's OU.
And he said Upper Volta when he brought up Burkina Faso earlier. It used to be called Upper Volta. That was the old name for it. And and I remember maps where Upper Volta is what it was still called. There's some bloody interesting things. If you go into African history, you'll discover all kinds of interesting stuff. It's really, really cool. All right, that's all we got time for there. Let's get into a little bit of blind history for this morning. So, blind history is where we get to check in on interesting people, interesting stories, interesting stuff from history. Of course, it's me and Anthony Mederer, and today is no exception. Today's pretty cool. We've got someone called Gilles de Rais. Now, you may not know who this person was. I didn't know until I started researching them, but what an interesting person. Everybody knows the story of Joan of Arc, right? The patron saint of France. But most people don't know the story of Gilles de Rais, who was around at exactly the same time. And there is a very dark side to the history of this person. So if you're looking for something interesting, you're in luck. Blind History is here. Good morning. Everyone knows the story of Joan of Arc, the patron saint of France, the heroine burnt at the stake for her valor and faith. Less well known is the tale of her companion in arms, Gilles de Rais, whom history has painted as less heroic. His macabre legacy was born in the dungeons of his castle, where the heat of torturous fires was accompanied by the sounds of chains and the screams of children. But did any of it really happen? Was he a mass murderer or a victim of his wealth and military success? Those secrets are buried under stone and ash and legend, and we may never know for sure. Welcome to another episode of Blind History. As always, I am here with Anthony Mederer. We are looking at, another crazy crackpot, potentially serial killer nutcase. This is one of those people who I think, everybody loves the bad guys. Those are the episodes that get the downloads, right?
Yeah, 100%. I was very excited. I was just so looking forward to doing this.
Yeah, you suggested this guy. I must tell you, I didn't really know a whole lot about him. His name is Gilles de Rais. He was born in around 1405.
Yeah, correct.
And he
15th century.
He lived about 40 years, maybe even a little bit less. He was in his 30s, I think, when he died. But he's probably best known to historians as having been a companion of Joan of Arc.
Yes.
During the fight against the English to get them out during the 100 Years' War in France. But to criminologists and to forensics experts, he's probably one of the first medieval serial killers.
Yes, because if we talk about Gilles de Rais, you could be talking about a war hero. It's well documented.
Yeah.
He was fearless, brave. He was to such an extent that the Dauphin at the time, and who later on became King Charles VII, and to protect Joan of Arc. And
he was also made Marshal of France, which was the highest rank in the military in France. So he was entrusted with basically running the whole French army.
And we could have done an episode on this war hero, which he was probably one of the richest people in Europe at the time.
Oh, yeah.
Especially early on in his military career and with his marriage. And so it could be about that. But actually, the story's not about that.
There's a lot more.
So
let's start off right in the beginning. He grew up with his maternal grandfather kind of taking a large, powerful role in his younger years and tutoring him essentially in war, in managing money, managing his estates and all the rest of it. And he married quite young and made most of his money just through that marriage. I mean, this is what used to happen to people, is that as soon as you kind of found someone who was a rich heiress, and the same thing happened with King Henry II famously when he married Eleanor of Aquitaine. You end up with a huge fortune because your wife brings it in as a dowry, which is a great way to go. I wish we could do that today. I wish there were more women running around with dowries. I mean, a lot easier. But his maternal grandfather rather, was called Jean de Caen, and he was a bit of a schemer, this guy. He arranged this marriage for him and tried also to arrange 2 other marriages before that to 2 other girls. But he eventually got married to a woman called Catherine de Tours, who was of Brittany. She was actually the heiress of 2 families. And that was where his fortune came from.
Yeah, and I think he had ended up with 7 castles, massive amounts of money.
Yeah.
But prior to that, and I think criminologists looked at it quite heavily, was he lost both his parents at the age of 10. So that more than likely knocked him. He could have seen his dad die in a hunting accident. It's not 100% fact, but he could have been with his dad when he died.
I love the way we apply modern psychology to these people in the Middle Ages. I mean, these guys just lived these very violent lives.
100%.
And it didn't matter whether you were a man or a woman, whether you were rich or poor. There was a huge amount of violence in medieval Europe.
There was.
And I think everybody must have had PTSD. Everybody must have been traumatized by just about everything that happened in their lives. So when these guys look back on, what could it have been that made this guy so bizarre towards the end of his life, they try to find these clues, but actually everybody's lives were pretty hard.
And I mean, the unknowns was real. They really believed that if they gave child's limbs to demons, that they could earn a bit more money. So it might have been as simple as that.
Well, let's not get there too quickly. So obviously now he's married, he's rich, he's got all these castles, and he decides to embark on a military career. And this is really where he made his name, because he got together with Joan of Arc, and from about 1427 until about 1435, he was the commander of the French army, and he managed to repel the English. They successfully reclaimed large swathes of France from the English. This was probably the height of French military success during the 100 Years' War. And it wasn't just England, it was the Burgundians as well. And he was eventually appointed Marshal of France. But then things started to go horribly wrong. Joan of Arc obviously was captured by the English. She was burnt at the stake, called a witch. We've covered her in a previous episode. Very unfair kind of, not particularly honest, decent way to treat Joan of Arc. And although she may have been manipulative, everyone seems to have manipulated this king. Because
but the king was useless. It was so weak, and I think that in the end, he just, she did everything and anything to get him, to put him back on the throne, so to speak.
Yeah.
Because at the time, and we've covered it as well, it's extremely interesting time in history, the 100 Years' War. In the beginning of that was Edward III. We had Henry V. Some of the greatest warrior kings known to the world. And he just stood by and just let justice, or whatever you wanted to call it, take its course, and she was burnt. And interestingly enough, Gilles could have been in love with Joan of Arc, and he was really traumatized. We say that word again, but he was traumatized when she was burnt at the stake.
Absolutely. I mean, it could have been him. First of all, he was aware of that. But second of all, the whole way she was betrayed by the Burgundians and the English, the way she was tried in this kind of kangaroo court, it just didn't make any sense. And looking back now, it was probably the most unjust thing that happened during those 100 Years' War. Of course, Charles VII, which we discussed already, weakling, but Charles VII was very dependent on Gilles de Rais. I think a lot of people in France were at that point, they were desperate for a hero. And since Joan had gone, he was the next best thing.
Yes, 100%. But and he true to form, he performed. I mean, he basically effectively ended the 100-Year War through running the military. And yes, he made a lot of money out of it. But in the meantime, already, there were things going on behind the scenes that came out later that, we're not sure. There's different sides to the story. Some people say it happened over 1 year. Some people say it protracted over 8 years, what he did to young boys and young children's.
Now, this already sounds like probably a really bad direction for anyone to go to. But he started to withdraw from military and public life, and he established a chapel called the Chapel of the Holy Innocents. Now, this is based on a story from the Bible where Herod went around slaying all the eldest children of many of his own subjects, King Herod of then what was Judea. And the reason he did this was because he knew there was this prophecy about the Messiah who would come and become king of the Jews, and he was terrified that this would displace him. And in some way, this became a part of the story of this Chapel of the Holy Innocents. And he designed his own robes. He built this little church. It was very strange. It sounds a bit culty. and he produced all these theatrical spectacles. Now, what we have to remember about the Middle Ages too is that if you were an actor or a singer, that was considered beneath a nobleman. It was considered actors and singers were like prostitutes.
Yeah.
They weren't considered part of acceptable society. They were there to entertain people, but nobody really took them seriously. And here's this guy who would cast himself in these things. He would put on these enormous productions, and he would spend huge amounts of money, his own money, putting these incredible productions together. And then he would give people free food so that all the poor people in the whole of France would come to see these productions, and then he'd say it was a huge success.
And it cost an absolute fortune.
Yeah, totally.
So that was just one of his poor investments, amongst other things. I mean, he spent off the charts. And I think this is also somewhere where a lot of his troubles came from. But the play or whatever he put on was Joan of Arc and the Battle of Orleans.
Yeah.
Or the Siege of Orleans, as they called it. So it was still very much around Joan of Arc. And there was also something about the cathedral that it's like a shrine to her in some way.
Well, here's an interesting thing that people might not know about. The 600 costumes were constructed for the one play that was performed on the 8th of May, 1435. 600 costumes. And they were worn once, and they were thrown away. And then they were made again for every subsequent performance. So you can see that the wastage here is just unbelievable. Unlimited supplies of food and drink were made available to spectators, all at his expense. He's like, let's just throw some money at this.
Now
Crazy.
The family got really nervous. And initially,
Even the Pope got nervous.
Well, they approached the Pope, and the Pope said, well, it's got nothing to do with me. Sort your own shit out. Haven't you got a king? So then they went to the king.
Yeah.
And then the king stopped everything. So he was cut out. He could, because he was mortgaging everything.
So basically he became like, when you get a bad credit score these days, no one can do business with you.
Yeah.
You're declared what was Dudu Mieni here in South Africa, the former chairperson of SAA, she's a delinquent director.
Yeah.
So you're not allowed to run any companies, do any deals. No one's allowed to contract with you. You're basically cut out of the financial system. And they did this perhaps to manipulate him because he was wasting all this money, or maybe there were more nefarious things going on.
More than likely, there was deeper meaning to it. But ultimately, in the end, I mean, he needed to come up with some money. So where is he going to earn money? And at the time, alchemy, turning base metals into gold,
Right.
seemed like a plan. That was the one thing. And then also chatting to the odd demon to assist as well.
Okay, so this is the stuff that obviously with the benefit of hindsight now we can say, well, there's probably a lot of nonsense going on here. Because what they did is, alchemy was it was the proto-chemistry. People really didn't understand what stuff was made of. There was this idea of a philosopher's stone, and you could take any of the other metals and turn them into gold if you discovered the philosopher's stone. And if you played around with chemicals, which was still very mysterious, and people didn't know the difference between alchemy or chemistry in its infancy and witchcraft. So it was easy to say, oh, well, this guy's blowing things up. There's all kinds of weird stuff going on in his laboratory. He must be summoning demons. That noise couldn't have come from anything else, right? So now we look at it and poor peasants running around in the fields outside his castle. Oh, my lord, don't beat me. Suddenly they listen and they hear these sounds coming from his laboratory, and they think he's definitely conversing with demons.
Yeah, maybe he was just babbling something in a...
Maybe he was just, blowing something up.
Yeah, 100%.
Making what kids would do with a chlorine bomb.
What he did admit to in the end of his trial was that he owned a book on alchemy.
Right, that's all he admitted
That's all he admitted to.
So possibly everything else you hear from here on was made up post his story by people who didn't like him.
Yeah.
And remember, he was a target because he was terrifically famous, very successful, had a great military career, saved France effectively, and had lots and lots of money, and people didn't like him. There were lots of people who were very jealous of that, including possibly King Charles VII, certainly the Duke of Brittany, and he was...
And the religious houses.
And the religious houses. So what they did is he obviously was talking to people also who were interested in alchemy and all of this stuff. And naturally, he then gathered around him a bunch of people who were probably a little bit weird and dodgy. You know, these weren't scientists. They were mostly religious fanatics.
sorcerers, as they called them.
And the fact that he had his own little chapel, all of this made people nervous about his religious intentions. And apparently, they tried to manifest demons. Now, this is what people wrote after the fact. But he grew frustrated because the demon wasn't doing what he needed it to do, all in inverted commas. So apparently, in order to get the demon to do what he needed it to do, they needed to offer him, the demon, body parts of a child. This is what people wrote. So Ray then eventually went off and provided these in a glass vessel. Nobody said where it came from. And the experiments continued, but obviously there was no result because now we know that this is probably nonsense.
Yeah.
But he did admit that he had committed assaults on children between spring 1432 and 1433. And that was enough to kind of seal his fate.
Yeah, but if they talk about the numbers they were talking about then, that would have been one person a day. But it was over 300. So there was a lot of stories going around of how many, etc. But the method and what modus operandi he employed, it was the monks. Who thought that up? So you must know what type of mind the monks had to come up with all of that stuff he supposedly did.
So, I mean, what were these tactics? Because people like the grisly, gory shit.
So first of all, he'd bring them in, he'd dress them up in the finest clothes, given a lavish meal, given wine, which had a sugar in it, which was supposed to pep them up a bit. And then he would take them upstairs, and then he would tell them what he was going to do to them. And then he would love seeing the shocked look in their eyes. The fear. So that was initially what he did. And then he would hang them up. And so they were just hanging in front of him. He would masturbate in front of them. That's why I'm saying somebody made the story up. So it could be, I mean, who wrote this?
Well, considering the history of the Catholic Church, is it so difficult to draw a link between a bunch of very strange monks? And we know that there are still priests like this today. I'm certainly not saying this is the case for all of them, but we know that there's a lot of dodgy stuff that the Catholic Church has covered up over the years. Imagine these years when nobody kept records of this stuff.
Exactly.
There's just a bunch of peasant kids. Nobody really cares.
You know, the monks were probably masturbating.
Well, this is it. They may have just projected all of their stuff onto Gilles de Rais because then they could assuage their own guilt.
Yeah. But then he would bludgeon them to death, and then he would cut off the best limbs.
Sometimes he'd decapitate them. Sometimes he would, listen to this. I mean, there's an actual supposed witness testimony that he would either kill the child himself or have the child killed by his cousin. The victims were sometimes killed by decapitation. Sometimes he would beat them with a stick. Other times they would have their throats slashed. And he would infinitely take more pleasure in debauching himself than them. In his own confession, he testified that when the said children were dead, he kissed them, as you've just pointed out, and those who had the most handsome limbs and heads he held up to admire, and their bodies cruelly cut open and took delight at the sight of their inner organs. I mean, this is some sick stuff. So either there are really twisted people who wrote the history of Gilles de Rais, or he was a total nutcase and
they said
psychopath.
They found 40 bodies, but then also said they didn't find any bodies actually. So it's difficult to know exactly. But interestingly enough, near the very end, one of the documented victims was a apprentice from a furrer. I think it's in the region of Rais, and he asked if they can use the apprentice as a messenger for him to take a note somewhere. So first of all, the question that maybe we should ask is, can't he get his own couriers? Why does he have to use some poor furrer's courier to? So that was really strange. But then they started investigating more and more. And then, you know, he didn't really give a shit because he kidnapped a cleric at that time. And then now the bishop started looking into this. And I think that's when it sort of unraveled. And I think literally a year later he was burnt.
So yeah, they sentenced him, and obviously that was the end of him. He was not going to come back from this easily, despite having saved France. They executed him by hanging him and then burning him. He and his two accomplices proceeded to the place of execution. They are said to have addressed the crowd with contrite piety and begged for salvation. His request to be the first to die had been granted the day before. At 11 o'clock, the brush at the platform was set afire, just like had happened to poor old Joan of Arc. and Rais was hanged. His body was cut down before being consumed by the flames and claimed by 4 ladies of high rank for burial. And that was the end of him.
But interestingly enough, there was a child's folklore fable of Bluebeard.
Uh-huh.
Bluebeard was loosely based on him, although the Bluebeard in the story or the fable is around him killing his wives. And apparently now Bluebeard is shorthand for serial killer, which is something I didn't know.
Well, they actually did a mock trial in 1992 where they pretended that they were back in the 1400s, and they staged, with all the evidence they could gather, a devil's advocate situation where they had 2 panels of experts debate whether or not he was actually guilty of these crimes. And apparently they put this ad hoc court together, and a team of lawyers, writers, French ministers, parliament members, etc., all got together and they decided he was not guilty, based on all the evidence they could gather from the time.
Yeah, so then the Gilles de Rais war hero and the first major serial killer, or not?
Yeah,
we'll never know.
And you know, like a lot of people in the French medieval period, there were some people who were extremely violent, extremely dangerous, but the legends always end up being more impressive than the real stories in so many of these cases. Either way, if you wanted a bad guy and you believe all of the stuff that came out of this,
then he's top of the list.
He's right there. Yeah. Unbelievable. What a story. Thanks for listening to this episode of Blind History. Every episode is available on the Cliff Central app, cliffcentral.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. In the next episode, famously, he also had all these rock inscriptions made, which kind of told the story of his reign and of Buddhism and of why it all mattered and what philosophies he embodied. Most people couldn't read in India, so the priestly class or the warrior class would have to read these things to people, and that won a lot of people over.